This is the respiratory system. Yeah. The respiratory system is primarily used for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide from the blood. A few other functions of it. It does as air is passed over the vocal cords, it helps us speak, make sound. It also assists with smell by bringing air in through the nasal cavity, and it takes the air across the nasal mucosa, which allows it to detect chemicals that are in the atmosphere. Oh no, excuse me, allowing us to smell. It's also regulating the blood pH. We're not going to go into it a lot in this course, but by doing this, by removing carbon dioxide, it raises the pH because carbon dioxide dissolved in water creates an acid, which would lower the pH. So by removing carbon dioxide, it helps regulate that. It helps regulate blood pressure. Using angiotensinogen, which is created in the liver, and then the lungs turn it into angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2, which helps regulate blood pressure. And then the final one is the Valsalva maneuver. And this is where you're holding your breath and pushing. An example would be if you're lifting something heavy, you kind of hold your breath and really grunt with it. That's what we're talking about in this aspect. That would be the Valsalva maneuver. All right, the gas exchange. Primarily, we are talking about oxygen and carbon dioxide. Or, I mean, primarily, that is what we were talking about. Oxygen is bound to hemoglobin in the blood, and that's the iron-containing protein. There is some of it that is dissolved in the water portion of the blood, known as plasma, but it's not nearly as much as there is in the hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, most of it's converted to bicarbonate, and then it can be transported in the uh, plasma, and this is what raises the pH. But if the pH gets too high, then we won't exhale any of this, and it'll lower the pH, turn it into a carbonic acid, which will again lower the pH if it gets too high. Lungs are primarily the exchange, and this is based on the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide in various parts of the body. So at the alveoli, deep in the lungs, oxygen is really high and carbon dioxide is low because you have inhaled the oxygen. So carbon dioxide will flow across into the blood, and carbon dioxide will flow from the blood to the lungs. Again, it's based on the concentration. In your tissues, carbon dioxide is very high because, well, you've been using the oxygen to create for metabolism. So, and the oxygen is low right here. So again, the carbon dioxide will diffuse from the tissue into the blood so they can be carried to the lungs. And then the oxygen is already absorbed from the blood into the tissue so that they can go through cellular aerobic metabolism, cellular respiration. So again, these are moving based on their concentration gradients. And then in the respiratory system, we have some main things. You have your the trachea, which is known as the windpipe. And you have your right lungs, which and then your left lungs. The right lung is divided into three portions: the anterior, middle, and superior, middle, and inferior. The left lung is divided into two: the superior and inferior. Your diaphragm is the main muscle for breathing, and when you inhale, it's pulled down, which increases the volume of the pleural cavity where the lungs are, which allows air to flow in through it. In the upper respiratory system, you have the larynx, which is known as the voice box, the pharynx, which is basically from this portion down to here in the back of the throat. You have your nasal cavity, and then the nostrils are the openings going into the nasal cavity. In the back here, there's some portions called the choana. I'm trying to spell that for you on here. The choana, these are openings at the back that lead down into the pharynx. Yeah. Again, trachea is your windpipe, and then it will divide into a right and left main bronchi, and so we'll get to those a little bit more later. These are the major regions of the respiratory system. All right, so for the upper respiratory system, we're talking about from the larynx up. We have the nose, and the nose is it primarily warms and cleans and humidifies air. Think of in the wintertime here, it gets pretty dry when it gets down into the teens or single digits. So as you inhale air through your nasal cavity, it will humidify air before it gets to it warms it, cleans it, and humidifies it before it gets to the lungs. It's also used to detect odors, and it is a resonating chamber for a vocalization, so it helps us make sounds. The pharynx is from those choanae that I was telling you about to the larynx, where the voice box is. This is all the pharynx, and it is broken up into three regions: the nasopharynx, which would be the upper region, the superior; the oropharynx, which would be the back of the throat; and then the laryngopharynx, which would be right around where the larynx is. The larynx is the voice box. This is where our vocal cords are, and we are able to make sound by passing air across these. A few other things in here. The epiglottis helps us to protect stuff from going when we're swallowing. It helps keep food or water liquids from going down into the trachea and choking us. So it helps make sure that swallowed items go down the esophagus instead of the trachea. Regions of this, the anatomy of portions of it. So again, these right here, it would be right back to here. These are the choana that I was telling you about. So the nasopharynx is right up here. Your oropharynx is right here at the back of the throat. Then you have your laryngopharynx right here going down to the larynx. You have the oral cavity, also known as the buccal cavity. Notice that the esophagus is behind the trachea, and if you were to feel your throat, you'd be able to feel these cartilaginous rings, the cricoid and thyroid, excuse me, not the thyroid gland, but the cricoid cartilage. It's letting you know that the trachea or the windpipe is anterior to it. You have the epiglottis right here, and this is what helps when you swallow stuff. It will block off the trachea so that food or liquids will go down the esophagus. If it doesn't do its job, that's when you start to choke and you say that it went down the wrong hole. All right, for the lower respiratory system, we have the trachea and the bronchi coming down. Again, the trachea is the windpipe. It's right at the anterior portion of our throat. We can feel that with our hands. It is the main airway, main passage for air to get down to the lungs. The bronchi are branches, and if you were to have a picture, or if you had all the bronchi and you were to turn it upside down, it actually does look like a tree. The lungs are an elastic organ, so they can stretch, expand as the air pressure is increased inside or decrease, the air flows in. And then they can, as the chamber, your pleural cavity decreases in size, they can be squeezed down and force air out. This is the main region for the blood and atmospheric gases to be exchanged. And that occurs at the alveoli. This is the smallest region of the lungs. If you remember early on in the semester, the pleurae is the cavity that holds the lungs. Um, it has it's a double layered, so it has the visceral and the parietal. The visceral pleurae is attached to the lungs, and the parietal pleurae is on the inner surface of the rib cage. So it lines the inside of the rib cage. And again, this is to help reduce friction. It also lines the mediastinum or mediastinum. Both ways are correct pronunciations. The mediastinum is where the heart would be located at. Again, the pleural cavity has fluid in it between the visceral and parietal, and it reduces friction so that as your lungs slide against the ribs, there's no friction, so it doesn't hurt. This allows it to expand, and you could think of it like it's a balloon inside of a syringe. As you pull down on as you pull on the plunger, it increases the area, so air goes in. When you push on the plunger, it decreases the volume of the syringe, and air would be pushed out, much like what happens in your pleural cavity. In the larynx, you will have the cricoid cartilage and the the thyroid cartilage. These make up the voice box. This is in the upper region of at the superior end of the trachea. And the trachea, this is the windpipe. This is where air goes down. Right through here is where your vocal cords are, and as air passes through this, you're able to make sounds. This is a diagram of the lungs themselves. So you have the main branch, the trachea, and it branches off into the main bronchi, left and right, one for each lung. And get on the right lung, they have a superior, a middle, and an inferior lobe. The left lungs, there is a superior lobe and an inferior lobe. There's only two. This is called an oblique hillux, separating them. This is a transverse hillux, and this is another oblique hillux separating out the lungs. Imagine turning this picture upside down, and these are the branches coming off. It would look like a tree. And as it does go through, it'll branch into various ones. You'll have two secondary bronchi on the left lung, because there's two lobes. On the right, you will have three of them, because you have three lobes. But it does keep branching down smaller and smaller pieces. As it does, it will eventually get down to what we call terminal bronchiole, where it won't divide anymore. Then you have what we call our alveoli, and the alveolar sacs are all of them. The alveoli are the individual. There's a lot of vasculation through, a lot of blood flow, and this is a single cell layer, which allows gas exchange with carbon dioxide and oxygen from the atmosphere and from the blood to occur at that point. And that is it. Have a good day.